Hi everyone, welcome to another Reflections from Woolen Spinning. My name is Rachel. For those who have not joined us here before now and you spent some time clicking on my video and watching this, I want to welcome you to this place and thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. As I just said, my name is Rachel. I host the Woolen Spinning podcast here on YouTube. You can find that at youtube.com/c/Rachel Smith. Welcome, welcome. We talk all about hand spinning and making yarn and making fabric with our hand spun yarns, and that is what we gather to do here. As part of an ongoing series called Reflections, I decided this year to put together a monthly sort of reflection about the things that I'm thinking about and the things that I'm kind of ruminating on, if you will. There's a lot that goes on when we're sitting at our wheels, whether it is, listening to an audiobook or a podcast, listening to music, or just sitting with our thoughts. And that is something that I wanted to start sharing with you guys, mostly because it's a platform for me to be able to share those ideas with you, but also because over time, I have found that a lot of you have a lot of the same thoughts and often build on those thoughts that I have initially by piecing together and supplementing with your own ideas. If you have shared in the comments in the past, thank you so much for contributing to the conversation and for keeping the conversation going afterwards. It means a lot to me and I deeply appreciate it. So over the last 6 months or so of the year, we've I broke up the year into various segments. So we started off the year with the first 3 months talking about sort of what I believe and what I think about when it comes to hand spinning. What are some of the things that are things that have changed over time, like chasing the perfect yarn, to how those thoughts have changed over time, over the course of 10 years, how has what I used to believe changed, and finally why technique doesn't always just make for satisfying work. Sometimes we need to be driven by other factors. So that took us into the early spring, and then we started talking about how I actually do my work. We talked about decisions that I make while I spin or before I start a big project. We talked about what slow making looks like in real life. And because of the last year that we've had and the way that life has been, that was a really topical conversation for me at the time. And it really seemed to resonate with a lot of people in the community because of transitions that they were in at the time. That feeling of being in limbo and that feeling of being moving from one stage to another, whether physically because of moving house, or emotionally or mentally, spiritually, all those different things. What real life looks like changes over time. And then we finished off last month by talking about the role of repetition and how that helps with learning the skills of fiber prep and how important having a daily practice is. A couple of people weighed in and said that while their practice isn't daily, it is very much weekly or monthly, and they engage in those practices over and over and have found a lot of meaning in that. And that was a wonderful place to end off. This month, we're going to pivot a little bit to talk about teaching and to talk about community and why that is so important. I do have notes to keep myself on track so that we don't get hit too many rabbit holes and take too many side quests. If you have been with me for a long time, you will know that that is something that often happens here. Let's talk this month about why community accelerates learning and why that is something that is really super important. If you are just getting started here and you are new to the Woolen Spinning community and you're new to these vlogs, again, thank you so much for tuning in. But also down below, there is a Start Here guide that many people use to orientate themselves, to figure out where they fit and what they might be interested in. So have a click on that after this video is done so that you can read through and see what might work for you. So we often imagine learning as something that we do alone, and it's something that we sort of hunker down at a desk in a library or in our home studio, and this idea of being on our own, being the lone wolf, maybe engaging in something hyper independently. We think of books and practice and repetition and sitting there for hours at a time. and sort of making a study of what it is that we're trying to learn. And I think this is something that comes up for me again and again and again in the community. I see people trying to come at this from a purely cerebral perspective and trying to put everything into its place and making order and making sure that they're going about things the right way. And I think that's really human. And I think we all have a tendency to try to make sense of chaos and make sense of disorder when we're trying to put together a learning plan and put together a way of approaching something that we want to master or that we want to get better at, that we want to feel that we have accomplished, or that we're starting to tick some things off of a list, even if it's an imaginary list, to orientate ourselves to becoming more and more comfortable with what we're studying and with what we're trying to learn. And those things matter. Those things are really super important. And my own learning has been deeply shaped by other people, and that is what we want to talk about today. So as I look back on the last 10 years of woolen spinning, one thing has become increasingly clear. Very little of what I've learned happened entirely on my own. A lot of it did at the very, very beginning, we'll talk about, but much of it, spinning in itself, even though it's quiet, it can be very solitary. My understanding of fiber arts has been shaped again and again through conversation, questions, shared experiments, seeing how other makers approach the same materials. And community doesn't replace practice, but it does enrich it significantly. So wherever you are, if you have access to community, whether that's online or in person, or ideally both, that is something that I would highly, highly recommend. This is why community matters. So learning isn't just about finding answers. It isn't about just hunkering down with a book and being shown or being told the right way of doing things. And I put the quotes right. I put it in quotation marks because this is something that we've talked about again and again in our community. And I'm just going to take a little bit of a side quest here for just a moment to talk about what I mean when I say the right way and I put it in quotes. One of the things that we have found again and again and again over the course of many years now is this idea that you sort of get this idea of sort of how you're going to approach something or how you're going to approach a certain way of doing things. And then you realize pretty quickly that there's multiple ways of doing something and that there's multiple right ways and that everybody has their own way of doing things and it's the right way for them in that time with that particular material, practice, fiber, wheel, spindle, whatever it might be. And that often that changes over time. The way that I would approach a fleece now versus how I approached it 14, 15 years ago is very different. Part of that is availability of materials out there to purchase, the quality of fleece, the variety of fleece and where it comes from, the skirting that goes on beforehand, the skirting that I do myself, how I want to wash it and finish it, the prep that goes into it. All of those things change over time. None of that was learned by myself in a little silo cut off from the rest of the world. And oftentimes, and for those of you who've been around in the woolen spinning community for a while, will have experienced this again and again and again. Often another spinner notices something that we've completely overlooked. And quite literally just a couple of episodes ago on the live stream, we had a whole conversation about suspended and drop spindles, suspended spindles versus supported spindles that were things that many of us have often completely overlooked. And it was around this idea of sort of the weight of a spindle as you draft out the fibers, and comparing our different yarns that we make when that's the case on a suspended spindle versus on a supported spindle where there is no weight on the fiber as we draw it out. And it creates different yarns. That is why community matters. It's because everybody notices different things and our brains work different ways. Some of us are highly analytical. Some of us are highly driven by emotion and feelings and ideas and can move between those ideas very fluidly, whereas others are more rigid and have a little bit more difficult time pivoting to a new idea and need to be coaxed there or eased there. Other people are highly experimental and are constantly trying new things and moving on to the next idea and using one idea to move on to the next idea. And other people are a combination of all different types of learning and all different types of ways of doing things. And something that I notice might be completely different from how somebody else notices something. When we borrow experiences from one another, it's almost like these little gifts in the community are passed around. We don't have to make all of these mistakes ourselves. We can do that by engaging with one another and helping one another along on our various learning journeys and learning paths. Sometimes I'm engaged in an experiment that to me seems really pertinent and seems really important. And there might be a handful of people in the community that have already done that and they've already explored that. And they're like, hey, wait up, stop, Rach. Have you thought about, I did that experiment a few years ago, or I have experience with that particular material and fiber, or I have done that type of fiber prep and here's what I learned. And you can use that to then jump to the next idea. And so we learn through observations, not just of our own work, but of other people's work. We learn through shared success. Hey, I had a really great experience doing blah, 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 blah. Why don't you try that? And that person comes back and says, oh my gosh, that went so well. I learned so much, but it went well. Shared frustrations. I tried the thing you suggested and it didn't work. What now? I tried this thing. I thought it would work. It didn't work. Now what? I can share with one another those things that don't necessarily go as smoothly as we thought. I literally just got a message this morning from someone who had a bit of a road bump when it came to making some stock yarn, and they were feeling a bit frustrated and sort of realized that they've got some learning to do around some of those things. I could so empathize with what they were sharing. I have had the exact same experiences and I've had the exact same frustrations over time. Those are things, that is what community is for, is sharing not just those successes, but those frustrations. And then of course, comparing outcomes. And I don't mean comparing outcomes to, in the sense of like comparing to the Joneses and keeping up with the Joneses. I don't mean it that way at all. I mean it more in comparing outcomes to, I spun this fiber this way and I got these results. Oh, hey, I spun the exact same fiber this way. How do they differ and how are they similar? That in and of itself is actually priceless. I'm going to take us back to our year of color. There was a month there. It kind of lasted for about 6 months, to be totally honest, but there was an actual month where Rebecca and I really focused on encouraging everybody in the community to make color wheels. Oh my goodness, could the color wheels not have come out differently? They were incredibly diverse. Some of them were made with the same colors, some of them were made the same technique, and yet every color wheel was completely different, both painted and in fiber. Some people dyed their color wheels, some people blended their color wheel on a blending board or on a drum carder. Some people did a combination of both. Some people spun bigger samples. Some people spun smaller samples. Some people did CMYK color wheels. Some people did RYB color wheels. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that content is linked down below and you can check that out. It was incredible, and the comparisons that came out of that and the degree of learning was elevated. It was incredible to engage in. And I think all of us grew as spinners in terms of using color in those few months that we explored those color wheels than probably at any other time that year. It was very, very deep, very enriching, and really empowering because you started to see people really come into their own and spread their wings with their spinning. Everybody's confidence grows differently, and this is something that I come back to again and again. I was actually talking to my husband about this just this past weekend. Confidence isn't really like something that we build per se, because somebody tells us that we're doing well. Oh, hey, you're doing really super well, and all of a sudden you're confident. It doesn't really work that way. For me, it has to come because we begin to realize that uncertainty is a normal part of learning, that we aren't certain which way we're going to go and which way we're going to find whatever it is that we're going to create or to learn. When I was developing the sock content, for example, the how to spin socks on the School of Sweet Georgia, this was years ago, back in 2015, 2016. And when I was doing some of that initial content, I really felt like I had a huge mountain to scale, that I had a lot of knowledge to learn, a lot of yarn to spin, and it really came down to chipping away at it month after month. And every month that I felt like every month that I did that learning for that month, whatever it was, I built the building that became the confidence that I have now to speak to spinning for socks. It took time and it took energy, it took intentionality, and in community, we normalize the messy middle. We normalize that journey of building and that journey of seeking mastery. Some of us don't want to seek mastery in the sense of like, a capital M master spinner, capital M, capital S. Some of us just want to feel confident approaching our wheel, having a general idea of what we're going to create at the end, and engaging in the process and just enjoying the process and having confidence that our choices are going to make the yarn that we want to make. But community supports us in that messy middle while we're doing that building, and while we're getting to that point where we sort of self-identify as, I kind of know what I'm doing. I sort of know which way I'm pulling this cart, and I have a reasonable confidence that this is going to work out. That comes with time. That takes time, and community can support you in that, and support you in your questions, support you in your seeking, support you as you learn and grow, and as you observe other people's yarns and other people's process, and take bits and pieces from all of us. Craft knowledge has always been communal, and I think that's something that's very, very important. There's always been craftivism, which is, activism around craft. There's long before books and YouTube and JIT learning, which is just in time learning, knowledge traveled hand to hand, mouth to mouth. We spent time with the elders in our community who had more knowledge than us, and they passed it to us. This is simply continuing the tradition with maybe a slightly different medium and maybe slightly different formatting, because maybe we're consuming at home through YouTube or through threads where we're having to read a little bit more and share images with one another. But the gist is the same, that we're passing learning to one another, hand to hand, and showing each other what we're doing, talking through our process, talking through the decisions that we're making and why we're making them. And of course, community doesn't replace our own practice. I had this conversation with somebody recently that, the time that you spend engaged in your craft and engaged in the practice of spinning is not replaced by just sitting in community and talking about it. We have to actually do the thing. And it helps give our practice context. It helps us define meaning, why we're doing what we're doing, why it's important, what we're learning, sharing those learnings with others like we've talked about. And of course, there's that ongoing conversation that happens. And we're lucky in today's world. I think this is a glass half full versus glass half empty. I think sometimes people lament the loss of in-person communities to the degree that they used to exist. But what's cool about now is there's people in time zones that are up at the same time as you, and you can engage with them. I literally just said to somebody the other day, that if they had questions, to post it on the Slack channel, because chances are somebody in the world is awake and checking Slack at that exact time and will respond. And that's a really cool thing within these online communities that exist, that we can build that sense of community with one another, and that we don't have to be in the same place at the same time all of the time. And that's a really wonderful place to close, because I think this online community and this online world that we can live in, with not to the exclusion of the in-person community, that is very important as well, but we also get to do this thing that we love together, regardless of where we are in the world. And that's a really, really special thing at this time in history. If you want to learn more, please have a look at the Start Here guide that I mentioned previously. In the down below, there is also a link to the Patreon post itself, so that you can get started and look at some of the things that I mentioned, like the Year of Color and the color wheels, and the work that Rebecca did in the Wool Circle. Those are all available to you as one-time downloads if you don't want to have an ongoing subscription. Thank you so much for being here. Next month, I think we're going to get into what I've learned about teaching online and teaching hand spinning, and hopefully I can share some of my insights with you if you're thinking about doing the same thing. Until next time, happy spinning, happy making. Bye everyone.